You're watching Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
And we're back. We're going to talk about earmarks with just a little bit more transparency and making sense. Are those good guidelines for earmarks, Tom?
Well, I think transparency is an improvement. I think, you know, when you take a look at the process here, in many respects, the earmarks are things that don't pass sort of the market test, so to speak, in terms of the markup of legislation. These are things that would never get into the corpus of a bill. They're thrown in at the last minute, kind of with the hopes that nobody really catches them. And I think that it's really, you have to take a look at those leaders that are elected on a national basis, not on a local basis, to address this, because in the end, the public would be better off without them. And so it's the only person who's in a position to represent the national interest here is the president. And so I think it really requires pretty stiff action on his part to...
That's going to be a battle royal, though. I mean,
yeah.
Ron, what do you think?
Well, I mean, every politician looks at it from their individual perspective. I can't fault them for doing that. However, it's difficult to take the larger view for the benefit of everybody. The president is in that position. We don't really have any other people to do that.
To champion that cause.
Yeah.
Clay?
You know, it's just a vote buying scheme. You know, politicians are able to bestow favors and gifts upon, you know, their chosen friends and supporters, which in turn gives them larger contributions and support. You know, I'm from Alabama, and we had a governor named Big Jim Folsom who ran for re-election one time, saying basically, I didn't steal enough from you the first time, but if you vote for me one more time, I'll get enough this time, and I promise I won't run again. And he won because he had paved a lot of the back roads, the county roads, and so you know, a lot of the people didn't care how much he stole; they got the road.
Let's focus on AIG for a moment, because I think it's indicative of a whole area that we need to address. In the fourth quarter, AIG managed to lose $470,000 a minute. A minute, which for the quarter was $62 billion. It was the biggest quarterly loss for a corporation in U.S. history. And it was more than they made totally from 2001 to 2007. They made $58 billion. These numbers for the average person are just, you can't even, I mean, $470,000 a minute. What's the deal? Who's driving that train wreck, Tom?
Well, with AIG was a fairly complex, or is a fairly complex organization. It has standard, plain vanilla insurance operations that are regulated and are fundamentally okay. But it had this other piece which was involved in basically writing insurance on some very questionable kinds of securities, very high-risk securities.
But it wasn't really insurance, was it? These are bundles you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about credit default swaps,
yeah,
which in essence are an insurance policy against default on these various securities. And this
but they don't have to follow the regulations that insurance companies have to follow to do that.
They were set up in a way to avoid regulation. They escaped regulation. And so they were basically able to trade on those pieces of AIG that were fundamentally sound to be able to take these very risky positions. Now, they weren't viewed at the time as being so risky, but a lot of people were fooled by these very complicated securities that were created from things like subprime loans, and they were fooled as well. And that for a while, they did very well. They made a lot of money, but that's always the case with risk. You're going to win big and you're going to lose big. And unfortunately, it's not just the shareholders who are losing, it's the American taxpayers as well.
Credit default swaps are very, very interesting. They perform an economic function. They have a reason for their existence. However, they are not an insurance product, like Tom said. It's a swap, and as a consequence, it's not regulated. The entire GDP of the world is about $50 trillion. There is an estimate that the entire amount of the credit default swap market is about $45 trillion. I mean, it's totally upside down We've got to somehow stop that kind of activity in the future.
Right.
Credit default swaps basically worked as designed. They were designed to protect companies from individual companies being downgraded, and the downgrading resulting in loss in the value of their bonds that they've issued. They were not designed for a systemic failure of the entire system, and
when they came across that, it collapsed.
Yes. And so they've done what they were intended to do, but nobody envisioned the whole deck of cards falling down.
I've got a list of buzzword issues, and and I want some short takes from each of you on these, and I'll just throw them out. Let them fail or too big to fail?
Too big to fail is probably a reality that we need to just come to accept. Maybe it's too complicated to fail is a better way to put it.
Ron?
Too big to fail is a failure of our system to allow a company to get to that point. We can't do that in the future.
Clay?
I kind of want to equivocate here. I would normally be in the let them fail. Tom, makes a point in a sense that it's crucial to the economy. However, a very simple solution would have been, in my opinion, just getting away with the mark-to-market requirements. Bank capital would have been healthy overnight.
Bernard
and we
Madoff.
wouldn't have had all this.
Bernard Madoff.
I think here's the case of it's unbelievable that somebody could get by with that kind of fraud for so long, and I think there's a regulatory failure in this case.
Right.
It's all based on trust, the system that we've got. You can't know everything there is to know about investing your money. You've got to trust somebody. This man was hoodwinked a lot of people. He was not trustworthy. That is a failure of the system to correct that.
Clay?
The FCC just utterly has completely and totally failed. They no longer can define, much less punish, lying, cheating, and stealing.
We have about 30 seconds. Free market versus regulation.
We need both. But we need very sound regulation, very well-designed regulation to allow free market forces to operate most effectively.
Clay?
Free market, the only regulation I think we need is just that, to ensure a level playing field for everybody. Disclosure, no lying, cheating, and stealing. That's all the regulation you need.
The market in free markets is a viable model. It works. At the same time, you got to keep an honest man honest. The free markets right now are not working as we want them to.
I want to thank you all for joining us. We've got pages and pages more to go. Maybe we'll do this as this issue progresses. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Byline. If you'd like to catch Byline online, go to WILM-TV.com. I'm Don Ansell for Byline Wilmington. We'll see you next week.
You've been watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Join us every Sunday morning at 11 as we explore the issues that concern you.